Hello, hello. Can we have everybody here? Hello?
I think we're here. We're here.
We're here. Summer podcasting on the road, making it work. Hi, guys. How you doing? Where are you?
Where are we? Well, can you give 3 guesses? There are logs in the background, so that rules out some places in the world. Dave has a nice gingham wallpaper in his background for anyone watching on video.
I know you guys, and you're probably promoting your Montana rental that you would like people to Airbnb. So where can they find this beautiful hacienda?
Right up front. Here you go. Orofino, OROFINO.co. We have multiple cabins. We've got a large log home, and you can come stay here in Helena, Montana whenever you want to. 5-star. We're super hosts, by the way, on Airbnb. So you can trust.
Amazing. It's important. You got to plug your friends. You got to support. So anyway, well, another week, guys, and welcome to everyone to this episode of More or Less, where the Morins and the Lessins debate and discuss the biggest tech news of the week and maybe things that aren't in the news that should be in the news as well. We've got a full quorum here today. We have Sam Lessin, the I Told You So VC partner at Slow Ventures. Thanks for joining us today, Sam.
I'll take it.
Yeah, you have one I told you so I'll come back to you. Dave Morin, Mr. I've perfected my audio to a T, and now I sound better than everyone else while I'm investing in the future at Offline Ventures. And Britt Morin, his partner in crime, who really understands how the marketing and media sausage is made, and we rely on to teach us how to spread the word about all things we're doing here at More or Less and beyond. So, well, I'm excited, guys, because I feel like we had a little bit of slow week last week, and but I think we're back roaring this week. We've got Databricks buying Mosaic, an AI company, for more than $1 billion. So we were musing about whether deals were coming back. Britt, I think you get credit for being prescient on that one.
Megan and I told you so to Sam because
yes.
One random deal does not a trend make.
Keeping score.
We had a PE deal over the weekend as well in the chip world, so it wasn't an M&A.
Two deals, Sam?
Yeah. So,
I was going to say, Britt and Dave, since I'm an LP in your fund, I will absolutely give you credit had you invested in either of those.
All I'm saying is that
we're tough friends.
Sam, I'm an LP in your fund. I would have given you credit.
We've done well for you.
Oh my goodness. We're going to explore the LP relationships in another episode. But there's a little pep in the M&A step, it seems. We've got some confidential S1 filings.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems like there's a few IPOs in the works as well.
Slow works. Yeah. I mean, I think we were talking the information about ARM, which is one of the more longer, very important IPO. And it seems like the bankers are up there trying to get some anchor investors. One thing I keep hearing too, when I ask, when's the IPO window going to open? Everyone says, people are just going to be skittish to be some of the first of this cycle. And so they're also going to kind of demand a bigger premium and try and, lock in more support ahead of time. So I think we got to be a little bit cautious, but definitely feels a little bit like a mood shift in the last 7 days. You guys feeling that too?
You know what we should do? Are we more or less optimistic about the market this week versus last? We used to do this on our COVID calls.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh my God, the precursor of this pod was a COVID call once a week when we had no friends. Oh my God, I totally forgot.
We're more or less optimistic where COVID's headed.
Yeah. So, that's saying. Great. Okay.
Question is, how many times were we right?
I'm more optimistic on where COVID's headed.
Me too.
Our 6-year-old yesterday asked us when COVID started. It was very funny. I mean, kids are really developing a perspective and a timeline and a sense of moving beyond it, which is probably very healthy. But okay, so we've established that there's something brewing says 3 VCs and a journalist. So with that caveat, something brewing in this market. But, one thing I think where we want to dig in a little bit for this week's debate is, I don't know, I wrote a column recently just kind of saying culturally things are feeling a little ridiculous in Silicon Valley right now. We've got Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk preparing for an epic M&A fight prompted by Musk.
MMA. It's close to MMA.
I was going to say, is it an M&A fight now or an MMA fight?
Yeah, an M&A fight, Jess. That would
You guys have written the title for this week's pod.
If Musk wins, he gets Meta, and if Zuck wins, he gets Twitter and Tesla.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't think anyone wants that trade.
I don't know. For our viewers, I like to set up these topics. I suspect you don't need much setup for this topic, but if you do, Elon challenged Mark. Long brewing rivalry there, back to comments Musk has made about Facebook being bad for privacy and so on. And of course, just the egos of two of the most powerful and wealthiest people in the world is probably enough to forge a rivalry these days. But Mark, of course, accepted, each using their own platforms to communicate. Very important aspect to this, I think. And, who knows what will happen, but the internet is abuzz with this sort of potential fight, and there's all sorts of ruminations about what this says about tech culture, tech broiness, appealing to the tech bros. At the same time, we have, and it's completely unrelated, sort of, but continued sort of look at drug use in and around Silicon Valley companies. The Wall Street Journal published a piece this week that I know Dave wants to share his thoughts on. But it reminded me of a piece a few weeks ago. We reported at The Information about a company called Carev. It's an Uber for nurses. And the leader of that company, who following our reporting is no longer the leader of that company, had a long history of mismanagement. And one of the items was microdosing, during investor meetings and so on. So I think there's been more scrutiny to the use of drugs in somewhat professional contexts as well. Over to you, Dave. Like, what's happening here? Is something happening in the water? Is the media just making much to do about nothing? Are people bored? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, my general response to this is that 2016 or 2017 called and wants its stories back. This stuff is yesterday's news, in my opinion. At least the piece that was written feels like it could have been written any time in the last decade. This is old news. And I think that the thing that really got me fired up about it is that, if you look at entrepreneurs, there's a wonderful study that came out from UCSF, Berkeley, and Stanford called Are Entrepreneurs Touched with Fire? And it looked at the mental health of entrepreneurs and founders in Silicon Valley and found that a surprising 72% of founders report mental health concerns, and that founders also reported significantly more co-occurring mental health conditions than the norm, often up to 3 or 4. And the brass tacks research numbers are that, founders are 2x more likely to suffer from depression, 3x more likely to suffer from substance abuse, 6x more likely to have ADHD, and 10x more likely to suffer from bipolar. And so when I look at a story like this, you can frame it two ways. You can frame it as, is drug use increasing in Silicon Valley? And, boogeyman, how bad is this for society? And, I do think there are legitimate concerns around, are people using drugs on the job, right? These kinds of questions are real. And
the piece, to be fair to the journal, the piece was sort of trying to probe that. I was sort of light on examples, but it was talking about this being an issue for boards and drug testing in offices and stuff.
Yeah, but if you look at the people that they're referencing, Elon is self-described as having Asperger's. He's talked about dealing with bipolar-like symptoms in the past. Many of the people they reference are people who have been advocates for mental health. And so I guess the way that I look at it is, just one bit of context, Britt and I have a small mental health related foundation called Sunrise, and we've invested in the basic science around psilocybin. We were one of the first investors in the study that proved that psilocybin has over 80% efficacy for depression. And many of the things that are referenced in that article relate to people looking for, this class of people, which are founders and CEOs in Silicon Valley, which, through real research, suffer from these problems more than anybody else. And these people are naturally looking for ways to manage their mental health while also pursuing innovation and trying to do this very hard thing, which is build startups, for a society that really wants it. And I think one of the other reasons that I think that this is yesterday's news is largely Silicon Valley's moved on from this. Today, if you were actually looking at the real trends for managing mental health in society, you would see cold plunge, hot plunge, contrast therapy, deeper forms of meditation that are far beyond just the everyday meditation app. You see people like Mark and Elon studying martial arts. Martial arts are a form of mental health and physical health management and training and control. And so you've got actually, I think, a bigger story here, which is what are all of the ways that you can improve and not just manage mental health when it's poor, but take your mental health and physical health to the next level and find supernormal functioning, which is a lot what Silicon Valley is about. And so I think actually these are deeply interrelated, because these are ways that people are going about pursuing this. And I think we've actually largely, moved on, and we've actually discovered that many of these psychedelics in particular are deeply effective for managing depression in particular. And that there are new ways that people are talking about this, saunas, cold plunges, all these things that I'm talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say that I think on the flip side is it's of course, founders report more mental health issues. Founders are crazy, right? If you think about Silicon Valley and as a part of the culture, the founder being a founder, why are people really founders, right? You basically they're founders because in a lot of cases they have a screw loose and they can't quite fit into normal jobs and normal patterns in a lot of ways. And so
Absolutely.
I'm glad investor, now you're telling me what you really think about me, Sam. Thanks, I appreciate it.
I've done it too. So has Dave, so has Britt. I mean,
we've all done it. Screws loose. That's the name of this podcast.
Me, everyone on this call has a few screws loose.
Yeah, but Sam, to me, the story is about neurodivergence and how that's this core part of Silicon Valley, and that we don't talk about it that way.
Yeah, it just depends. You look at it. People are founders. They're founders both because they are driven to be founders and because they can't find happiness in the normal shit that other people find happiness in and fulfillment in, right? And normal stuff. And so, when we're doing investments, my question, I mean this seriously, is always you're always looking for people to invest in that are crazy but not too crazy, right? There's this fine line of craziness that I think is for ideal for founders, and there is a line everyone's trying to manage on that, right? There's not all the most successful people in the world are the craziest, but there are a lot of fucking crazy people, right, who have been super successful.
Well,
right?
Hold on a sec, Britt. I'm interested in in your take on this, and then I have some thoughts.
I agree that we're all crazy and founders are crazy and we live in the worlds of crazy. But I think the real frame for me is are they medicated in some way? And whether they're medicated with legal or illegal drugs, microdosing or whatever, even caffeine is a stimulant, Adderall, most people take some drugs every day, right? And so if that helps them get to peak performance, and doesn't make it awkward to interact with them, in a work environment, I'm sort of to each their own, whatever helps them. And I think the future of personalized health and personalized medicine is such that we're all going to be on a different cocktail of all kinds of things that will help us reach our peak performance in some way or another. And drug testing, all this stuff it feels too far of a reach.
Well, I gotta say, guys, I'm so uneasy by what you guys are saying, honestly. I think this idea that, just accepting that to do great things, you have to be crazy enough to do all these things. By the way, a lot of that are damn expensive and hard to do, whether you're talking about cold plunges.
Oh, this is a question of access to drugs.
Okay, but listen to this.
I'm kidding.
So
it's a question of it's a question to access to opportunity in business, and also what kind of, there are so many models of successful founders, right? And there's the Steve Jobs, insanely creative, where some drug use has been kind of celebrated, right? But if we as a society are just looking for people who have those attributes, man, we're just going to evolve this industry in a very certain direction. Now, Britt, where I do agree is I think what's personal is personal, right? And I don't really care what people's habits are around some of these things, and if they're personal, right? And that's what I'm kind of worried about is those lines like really seem to be blurring. I mean, they're blurring in society. And they're blurring now with like our leaders and the people that entrepreneurs and potential entrepreneurs are looking up to. And I don't think the message we want to be sending to these kids are like, yeah, you can do it if you take like this stimulant and stimulant and that.
Can I just, I mean, I think there's two pieces. Like one is where the engines of innovation, right? And like average people produce average stuff, right? Crazy people on like the margins produce interesting new stuff that other people haven't thought of or haven't worked on. I think that's a really important part of innovation and creation. There's a very separate question, which is responsibility as a fiduciary and as a leader. And I think that's the question for you is like, look, you know, to the extent that like you have neurodivergent people and like they're a little bit batty, but they're coming up with really important stuff and making big contributions.
Can I have a definition check on neurodivergent, Dave? Not like whom? Like what's neurodivergent?
Well, I think this is a really interesting question, actually. You know, we don't have objective tests for mental health. I mean, we could get really deep into this. I've been funding research around this stuff for, you know, close to a decade now. And, you know, I think neurodivergent today means a lot of the things that I said. You know, you've got people that are have Asperger's or autism. You know, there's high prevalence of that in Silicon Valley. You've got ADHD, ADD, bipolar, depression, like all these things. And I think that, Jess, you're right to be, you know, questioning, you know, should people be doing these drugs on the job? I mean, many of these jobs are still illegal, right? You can believe that they should not be illegal, right? And there's many efforts underway to prove that these drugs, you know, things like psilocybin, are efficacious and should not be and should be available. I don't think we are advocating in any way that people should be doing illegal things, to be very clear. But there are things like, you know, ketamine-assisted therapy that are completely legal. And they are deeply, you know, I actually very much agree. Elon said this yesterday that, you know, they're far better than SSRIs. I agree. I've seen the research. I've had friends whose lives have been changed. You know, it is a better treatment for depression than ketamine. And so, you know, are we advocating that you should go, you know, party and do these drugs in a social context and then come into work? Absolutely not. But for the people, you know, I think you can't ignore the research, which says that we work in a world where, you know, 3/4 of the people are statistically likely to have a neurodivergent brain, and you know it needs to be managed. One of the analogies that I really liked around this, and where I think we as a community need to change our narrative, is that if you were hiring or trading extraordinary athlete to the Warriors. Let's say the Warriors was, able to get LeBron or something like that. You wouldn't sign that contract, which is a contract in the tens of millions of dollars over many, many years, and then tell your athlete that they should eat ramen, never see their friends, never see their families, and get no sleep. You just wouldn't do that, right? In fact, you would invest in an extraordinary research-based health program that turns these people into superhumans, right? And helps them optimize all aspects of their mental and physical health using all the kinds of things that we're talking about, cold and hot therapy, all of these, eating in all these right ways. And, you would do it this way because this is what society wants out of the people that are the super normal functioning people in society. And so I think that's kind of the type of narrative that why I call this yesterday's news. It's like, yes, we should worry about whether people are having addictive behaviors and disrupting their companies and being poor fiduciaries. But as a community, we should also think about this in the way that pro sports thinks about it, right? Like we are actually writing checks.
Is every founder LeBron?
Sorry?
Is every founder LeBron, right? Or so, I mean, I think that
no, not necessarily, but you're still making
is that way of thinking like everyone who's not in tech and listening to this pod is going to be like, oh, those tech people, they think they're so important. Like,
I think it's
I think it's more the financial responsibility when you invest. Sam and I will start out with, a $1-2 million investment at the seed or something like that, right? And then as you go up to the Series A and Series B, you're talking about not just the founder, but a group of people who are, onboarding 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, $100 million of investor capital. And I think that it's fair to say to people, take care of your health. and not just your physical health, but your mental health, and do it in sophisticated ways, because you're responsible for a lot of capital and a lot of people's livelihoods. And, it should be something, at Offline, we've actually started writing it into our term sheets. And, it should be something that you care about. And we just, as a narrative, we haven't actually talked about it that way in the Valley ever.
I mean, I can just think look, the reality is drugs can be used in a variety of ways in a variety of contexts. And I think we can all agree that there are cases where you do not want, the CEO of a big company taking a bunch of party drugs and showing up to a board meeting and making terrible decisions and that does and to be clear, that happens, right? And people you can totally imagine the narrative where there've been some pretty big frauds committed recently where someone shows up and thinks they're a god and commits a huge fraud. That is going to happen. I'm just saying that the reality is it's tough because I think from seed founders, there's a spectrum to this, but I would say they're all nuts, right, in their own ways, and they have their own shit they're hung up on and their own things, and actually part of their value is their divergence and their craziness. The question of how they manage that from being creative and innovative and willing to take huge risks into, oh shit, you're managing a shitload of people and money and you're responsible, don't do things that are going to jeopardize that, I think is a very difficult shift. You hire LeBron, you're hiring him to make basketball shots over and over and over. You hire a founder from seed, and what you're looking for up front and the creativity you need can actually be very at odds with what you need from real management later on. And it used to be that the founders would come up with ideas and then you give them to some professional stooge manager who was not neurodivergent, and they'd kind of grow it up. And there's two different profiles. We're asking one profile to do multiple things now, and that's challenging, right?
So, Britt, you mentor so many female founders, and you work with so many. You have a course on helping people start their own business. I mean, how do you think this whole conversation resonates with ambitious women who want to start companies?
Well, if I can, I'd like to move less about the drugs and more to the Elon and Zuck MMA battle, because
we'll get there.
Okay. Well, it kind of ties together for me because I think yes, to your point, I have shepherded thousands of female founders, venture scale and SMB, right? And all across the country, sometimes even globally, ages 13 to 80. So I've seen the divergence in a different way of female founder brains. I don't know that female and male is a gender line of managing brain types. I think, in fact, many mental health disorders are more prevalent in women than men. I just don't think anyone's talking about it as often as they should be, and how they manage it, and no one knows how to manage it. And this gets into the whole mental health crisis we're in a whole different topical area. But it's interesting because I think people find vices. I used to go on the Rachel Ray show monthly for many years, and Rachel Ray would film 3 shows a day, back to back, and have 12 cups of coffee throughout the course of those shows. And it's wow. She's not microdosing ketamine, but she's using something that's helping her. It's a stimulant, right? And she's, using that to perform. And, I think that's what I meant about there's a variety of things that people need for them to feel like they can perform. And if they can do that responsibly, legally, I don't know that that's necessarily healthy to have 12 cups of coffee a day. I think there are better ways, to stimulate energy, but everyone has a different vice. And even, a talk show host will go to that extreme, and a founder will do something else. And so I just don't think it's our job to police it. I think every board, obviously if there are issues and illegal, drugs and, fiduciary responsibilities, that's what boards govern. And that's what, investors will help govern. And I think ultimately that onus comes down to the founder. So that's my perspective, but I would really like to weigh in on the MMA battle because
last question on this too, but and I think, I'm not known for my low standards with my team at The Information, but is the standard too high, I guess? Is this if we're basically saying that to start an important company, and now let's not say an Apple or a Meta or once in a generation, but to be a successful founder, whatever that means, right? You have to be crazy. You need a professional level of mental health support. to live up to the expectations and to do your job. Like, it doesn't sound great. And it also sounds like it may not be in the long-term interest of the sustainability of not just these people or these companies. Like, and again, I'm not, this isn't arguing to have lower standards, but that seems odd to me that like,
I just
the
think that
only
it's true,
way to
Jeff.
survive right now is
I
to
think
like,
you have to admit that the data, and it's just a truth about the system. It's not well, if we could ask for more normal,
should we fix the system? Like,
but
yeah, I just think it's a question of taking it seriously. I think there's a third bullet point here, though, which is that this sort of, war on drugs era, 60-year ago kind of narrative that like psychedelics in particular are bad is an old narrative that has now been proven by research to be wrong. And so what you also have is a lot of very smart people who build these companies looking for treatments that work for depression, right? Like I said earlier, if you're, more than 2x likely to suffer from this thing.
I get that point,
work.
Dave. I get that point. I think you're talking about where the state of the toolbox and the importance of the toolbox.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying, like, should we be wondering why the toolbox is so necessary?
But I think it's really simple, Jess, which is like, look, it's just a scarcity thing. It's like, most people, our society is designed for like a bunch of average people who, and again, this is not like a criticism of them. It's like they get joy from their jobs as consultants or bankers, and like they do a bunch of standard things, and the rails are set up for them to do it successfully. Most of these people who are founders, like part of the story is they really desperately want to found a company. A lot of the part of the story also is like they just can't fit into the systems that exist. Like they cannot be a McKinsey consultant, right? And so they bounce out into creating things and being entrepreneurs. And so again, this isn't every single person. They cannot exist and work. The interesting thing is like, I think what you need, and again, this is all just generalizations. There are exceptions to everything, right? But in general, you're looking for people. I think the people who are successful as entrepreneurs are the people who like don't fit into the systems we have established. There's incredible value to that if they can manage it. So like, it's kind of like, there's some incredible statistic about how the number of people who've been president who their parents or their fathers died young is like extremely high, right? And like it's like orders of magnitude higher than it should be, right? And it's just because like, well, if you lose your father super young and you're, historically, unfortunately at this point in history, like a young male, right? And you have to figure out a bunch of stuff out for yourself, right? Like you're more likely to be president, right? And like I think it's the same thing. It's like if you cannot fit neurologically or whatever, like emotionally or culturally into normal boxes, which can be great for most people, you find your way to Silicon Valley. The key is to find those people who have that aspect, but then actually have strategies where they're not too crazy. So like for instance, I love investing in athletes, right? Because like it turns out, especially if you're an endurance athlete, you've probably figured out how to control your emotions.
Yeah.
You've probably figured out how to stay on plan so you can be like out there, but still come back and manage successfully. Obviously you talk about what's expensive. It's like training for a triathlon. This does get to, I guess, the MMA point that Britt wants to talk about, but like doing athletic stuff is super hard and expensive, right? And so the reality is like there's a bunch of variants that like cold plunge. Like I love cold plunges. I do them all the time. They're actually pretty expensive and time consuming, right? To do.
Well, unless you just put cold water and ice in your bathtub.
That's not how Sam does it.
That's not how Sam does it.
I know that's not how Sam does it, but it is also, you can do it that way.
I'll put the link in the show notes to the information's review of cold plunges, by the way.
But the point is, like, I think that these things are all expensive in different ways. Like, the irony is like, actually, drugs are pretty cheap, right? And so, like, in some ways, like, there's a spectrum of, like, what people do, right? And, like, how they think, basically, what their makeup is, and then what strategies they learn for managing / to their, as these guys are saying, peak performance. And then, look, making sure, I think, is all great. And then, look, there are places where people go completely over the edge. And that's the problem with any of this stuff is like, it's like you could argue that if you show up to a board meeting having drunk 20 cups of coffee, you're going to make some pretty stupid decisions. Like, you know what I mean?
One of the places where this is normalized is in the music business. And one of our partners actually at Offline is on the board of this organization called Music Cares, which the music business set up a long time ago because they realized that this exact thing that we're talking about is the same case with musicians. And especially, you take a musician that's already neurodivergent, you put them out on the road for a tour for a year. And, it's like you're brewing a mental health catastrophe, right? And so they've actually set up infrastructure to deal with this, right? Like they actually have an organization with a hotline. As soon as you call it, they show up wherever you are and they help you, right? And so to some extent, I guess that's what I'm advocating for here, is that we start to just accept this, shift the narrative, and kind of, normalize that neurodivergence is the norm in Silicon Valley. And so what do we need to do as a community and as an ecosystem to help take care of these people in a more active way than just kind of ignoring it and, hoping it figures itself out?
I guess then we're gonna go full on MMA. But I think this, I just am still uncomfortable with this narrative that to be a great founder, you have to be a misfit. And maybe that's and I get that. Like, there's a part of that that's deeply logical, right? You are by definition not trotting a traditional path. But I think the symbolism of that has come to mean something that maybe not a lot of people can connect with. I certainly don't connect with some of the great, tech founders who are going down in history as sort of renegades and misfits, right? I just am very passionate and hardworking about something I care a lot about. And I say that not...
I love you dearly. You're a little bit of a misfit. You're a little bit of a misfit.
How? Welcome to group therapy.
Because out of the four of us, you and I are the most neurotypical, is how I would call us. And yet we're still misfits. And I think...
Okay, but maybe we need to rebrand it. So I'm not going to argue I'm normal. I'm not, or whatever that means. And I know you guys are using fancy PC language. I'm not, because I don't know what it is. But I think we have to be careful of the symbolism around this kind of stuff, because I think misfit has come to mean, there was an era, Dave, when you were saying this feels like several years ago, I thought you were referring to Travis and Adam, and to Uber and WeWork, and you weren't, right? But I think it was a real shame that those guys, whatever you think about them as entrepreneurs, and maybe the jury's out in some cases, that's just one that we can't have just these single stereotypes.
That's because those guys were destructively crazy, right?
But misfits aren't destructively crazy. I mean, try to tell that to the 20-year-old who wants to see their idea.
It's just a razor edge. I think that's the problem, right? And I think the managing that razor edge is hard, right? Which is I think that's the problem, right?
If we try to pretend like it's not a razor edge, maybe that's I'm kind of reacting to this pretty strongly, because it's not going to change. The data, it's the truth about the Valley of all of these creative industries. And so, Jess, I don't think it's you said when you reframed this, you have to be, different. I don't think it's the case, but it is the majority case. And it's just kind of, I don't think any of us are saying you have to be. It's not something I look for actively in the founders that we're trying to invest in.
Sam does.
The numbers, though. He's 72%. So, Jess, you're 1/3, 2/3, or 1 in 4, whatever.
Okay.
I'm just saying, I don't go out there going, I'm looking for neurodivergent.
1 in 4 founders are...
No, but Dave, you do go out being and I'm sure, because I've worked with you plenty on this, looking why do you have to found this? Why is
totally.
This so, and the reality is, here's the reality. Anyone who gives you a passion pitch about why they have to found a software company is a little bit crazy, right?
News, on the other hand, is objectively broken, and we need to fix it.
The other thing we're not talking about here is it's just hard. It's also just hard. Doing this.
No, that's
hard.
True. That's true.
I think that's the other thing we didn't spend any time on. We don't have to spend any more time on it, but it's a really hard path to do. There's a reason why most people fail at it. It's just really hard.
Entrepreneurship brought to you by the Morins and Lessins. Okay, Britt, what's the over and under on this fight, do you think? What's going to happen here?
Before I go into some of my feelings, I do want to laugh for a second, because,
I feel like it has to start with you guys. You have the closest information.
Well, first of all, I'm just going to start with my favorite part of this whole thing, which is when Elon, was waging this battle against Zuck, he on Twitter says, I have this great move that I call the walrus, where I just lie on top of my opponent and do nothing. That was funny. But then this response from a woman was funnier. She says, my ex had that same move. And it's amazing. And then so I read that and I'm laughing. And then I turn to Dave and I literally say, Dave can validate this. What women who are running companies today would ever do something like that. Like if women were running as many companies as men, or like there's a woman on top of Twitter and Tesla and SpaceX and blah, 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 and Meta, like, no, like this just wouldn't happen. Like this is just fucking crazy.
To be
And
clear, women are running Twitter and SpaceX.
Yeah,
just like we don't
well, yeah, Gwen really does pull the shots.
But I was actually wondering, like, what would the
apologize.
female equivalent of this be, Jess? Like,
There's no female equivalent. We can.
No,
we
there
can just decide.
definitely is a female equivalent. Come on,
What's
this is
the
just
female
high school.
equivalent?
Well, you tell me. How did girls fight in high school?
girls fight behind each other's backs, so it would all be.
Well,
Yeah.
there's your answer.
That doesn't happen in tech. Never, ever, never will happen. Never happen.
Oh, definitely not.
But okay, so we think this thing is funny.
It's
I think
hilarious.
it's funny. It's stupid. It's like more male, masochistic, stupid
I mean,
shit.
Sam, don't you know how to do MMA? When are you going to do a fight?
I'm not going to do one, but I do think
Sam's not good enough. I'll
I'm
just
not
say
good
it.
enough.
Tell us though, is Zuck like practicing? Have you? Do you have
so here's what I
insight
say. It's let's just step back.
It's
I think
clear
Britt's
that
right.
Mark's really good at it. Like, you don't have
It's
to.
very funny, right? And it's like, I mean, I think a lot of us have seen and loved the movie Idiocracy, and we can all agree that like this is a scene out of Idiocracy, right? Like, you know, it's like it's like there's no question about that. Like, you know, people. So I think that's clear. I also think my favorite comment on this was not mine, but I think it's so funny and so apt. Is like someone said on the internet, they said, well, it's really nice to see that historically, usually poor people fight for the amusement of rich people. And it's kind of nice to see really rich people fighting for the amusement of poor people. Like, it's funny, right? And like, I think that like, that's okay.
Okay, but I also think Dave has a really good analogy with the WWF. Which one is it? World Wrestling Federation. F.
Yeah.
About the heel and the face. And I think this is like
Yeah.
Zuck. I was also, here's the other thought I had after I was annoyed about the man thing. Then I was like, okay, what's happening in Meta's PR room right now as they give Mark permission to put this out publicly? Because clearly, like,
No one gives Mark permission.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Britt, those of us that have worked with him know that there's no permission.
What happens in the PR room after Mark says this publicly and they're like freaking out with crisis control, right? And I actually think they might be excited about this because it helps frame Zuck as the face, not the heel, which is like the good guy in the wrestling. Because like Elon is
because he was challenged.
Bad guy. He was challenged. He's like Elon's like fighting, and Zuck's just like this good guy who's like doing his martial arts and like, okay, I guess I'll fight you. And like, I feel like this could be net positive for Mark's reputation.
Can't it just be silly and fun? Like,
I mean, the world is in a, like, I mean, maybe at some point in history, but I just think that like this is a moment of like kind of like it's a really serious moment. I mean, both of these companies have laid off a tremendous number of people, right? It's down to business, it's work. I mean, yeah, we all deserve to be amused, but I think like that should just be for fun, and these guys should pursue their hobbies like to the nth extreme, kind of for fun. But like it's unfortunate, but to me it's like sending the message that like when you reach the pinnacle of business, like you prepare to like punch your enemy in the face, you know? I mean, there's so much what these guys do really matters and travels. I think more importantly at this phase it's a media circus, and I think everyone's playing into it, and I think both of them are playing into it because it's good for their platforms. And
is it good for our podcast?
I mean, we have constrained it to a relatively small amount of time here. But it's like, you know, the media needs fun things to talk about. I just wish there was like some other prank and funny, ridiculous thing that we could talk about that didn't involve, you know, like Mortal Kombat.
I think they should toilet paper each other's houses like we used to do in high school.
Yeah, good old prank war. That's what the,
prank
you know,
war.
What like I just think like, look, the one thing I will say, I think that does connect us some of these, maybe these drug stories and kind of what's going on with MMA silliness or whatever, is like, I do think we're at this moment where like Silicon Valley culture and tech culture is like very unclear, like where it's going, right? You went through this era of like, you know, free snacks and we're saving the world.
Yes.
And then we like made everyone go remote. And then we fired a bunch of people, and
now we're defining it by MMA.
Well, it's not. We're not defining by anything. I think it's just
but
like
these are also hobbies that started with the pandemic, right?
Well, I just think it's like, so I just think we're in this like drifty period. Like, there's no clear thrust of VC. You know, it's like, yes, there's AI,
and like AI is going to end the world. But like that's actually, I think at this point, like feeling more fringy. Like people are excited about LLMs in various ways, but it's not as cultural a movement as it was like a while ago. It doesn't have like, there's no direction, right? And so like I just feel like what happens when there's no clear direction in a culture or is you just get a bunch of random shit, right?
Yes.
Like, and like I just feel like that's where we are. Is like we're in a moment like where like it's almost like a sailboat. Like when the wind's blowing, it's blowing a direction. We're kind of like floating around in irons. The boat's not really
I
going
think these
anywhere.
things can tip. Like I think they can tip. That's why I'm bringing it up. Why I wrote about it in the information. Right. I think these subtle changes, that era of like Google having a few bouncy balls to the entitlement of free sign, like these things happen kind of. They don't happen all at once, but they can tip, and that's why I think how you framed it, Sam, makes a lot of sense. And I think we just have to be really mindful of like what is in the soup of culture right now and like keep it in balance.
I just don't be so worried about it. I just like, it's not like, I think it's like, if you like,
I'm a founder, I have to worry about everything.
No, you don't. I think that's actually part of the thing you have to get over is like, you don't have to worry about everything as a founder. You have to worry about some things. And like, I just feel like, look, here's my take on it. It's like the good news, if you want good news about is fighting in MMA battles and learning jiu-jitsu is extremely high barrier to entry and almost no one wants to do it, right? So like, it's not like we're gonna be like, oh, well, Mark and Elon fought, so now like every executive is gonna fight each other and like we're all gonna go to fight camp. Like most people don't want to do this, and even if they do, and it is kind of fun actually, like it's very high barrier to entry, et cetera. So I wouldn't like I'm not personally worried that this is gonna be like the tip of the spear and in 6 months, everyone's gonna be fine. Now I will say, it does seem like people are getting a lot fitter recently, right? As one thing that's happening in culture, and that's not bad, right?
Yeah,
people are into more sports.
That was kind of my point earlier. That
because we're so depressed, right? We have to be more fit. But anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Britt for the last word before our lightning round.
I was just going to say that I wonder how much is related to like maybe the recessionary environment, because industries that boom during recessions are like bakeries and bars, and then like the public's kind of bored because there's not as much like spending on entertainment. And I don't know, I'm just wondering, like, is there something interrelated here? Or is this just like, this would have happened 5 years ago or 5 years from now, and we'll see where it goes. But my question is there a date set yet? Is this happening? Like, is this going to be streamed on Oculus?
Stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Okay, we don't know yet. Okay, well, we need to do a live episode during the match so that our listeners can get our real-time feedback as it happens.
I'm sure they'd be delighted for that. Okay, let's do a quick lightning round before we disperse for our ice baths, meditation treatments, acupuncture, and therapy sessions that apparently
I actually am doing a little jiu-jitsu in 2 hours, but
Jess, I think you should do a cold plunge every day for 2 weeks and let us know how you feel.
They're great.
I've done a couple and I do like them. I've done a couple and I do like them. And
now that you've mentioned it, I'm going to go do one after this.
I'm also going to take my Jennifer Aniston peptides.
And I will jiu-jitsu each other in 1 week. Next Friday.
Sam's taking his
I'd
Jennifer
rather go
Aniston
surfing. Okay, let's just do it. Let's just call it more or less on cage fighting. Sam?
Oh man, that's tough. I mean, I don't know.
Tough. You just advocated that. How can you?
Well, the cage fighting is a very broad category. Fine, I'll say more because I'm supposed to. I think it's more complicated than that. Fine,
don't say what you're supposed to. Speak your truth.
I mean, I think that I am completely fine with and think it's kind of funny that Mark and Elon are planning to fight. Can I be more? Can that be my answer?
Sure. Dave, more or less.
I'm just kind of neutral, I guess. Well, frankly, I guess based on this conversation and the way I frame it, I guess, is that, I'm all for more people doing hobbies and sports that help them, attain higher levels of, mental acuity. And, I'm really into mastery personally, right? Like to me, like what I think is cool about this, I guess more on, it seems like on the Mark side, we've got a mastery thing going on, but I don't know Elon or on the Elon side that much, but I'm all for people trying to master things, and especially if they're practices which can dramatically improve their mental and physical health. So,
you're very well media trained, Dave. Good pivot.
There's no media training on this podcast.
I don't know. It's just really true. It's just,
Dave is actually just an authentic, thoughtful person. And so it's remarkable. Okay, Britt.
Les, this is so stupid. I'm so fucking over this patriarchal blah, blah, blah bullshit. And like, just let two women figure this out together.
Amen. Less cage fighting, more kicking ass in business. I think that's our rallying cry. So, fun to chat with you guys. Enjoy the mountains. And we'll be back next week. And hopefully we've moved on from this topic, but who knows? Who knows?
Right. Stay tuned for the live episode.
Tune in. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.